Hi, I'm Adam Spencer, and welcome to Quantum. In 1952, abstract expressionist painter Jackson Pollock dripped a few gallons of paint on a canvas. 20 years on, the Whitlam government created a national furore when it purchased blue poles. And now in 1998, we see what science has to say about what the artist was trying to achieve, and what blue poles, tiny electrical circuits, and nature have in common. Our tiny planet, governed by chaotic influences we've only just started to understand. Nature's willfulness and danger. Nature's beauty and peace. Science struggles to comprehend, to observe, to make sense of our very existence, as does art.
Science and art are very close together. They both deal with the act of observation. I think that science and art really help us discover who we are.
Richard Taylor's day job is at the University of New South Wales. What he does is pure science. He studies the peculiar way electricity works in nanotechnology. Constructed with the aid of an electron microscope, these electrical devices are 100 times smaller than the width of a human hair. They hold the potential to replace the transistor and revolutionise the way we use electricity. But there's still much to be understood.
The remarkable thing about these devices is that they're so small that we start to approach an operation where they're right on the edge of nature. And so normal rules that we apply to commercial, larger transistors break down.
While this remarkable research may be a key to the future, it's unexpectedly allowed Richard to resolve a dilemma from his past. What he really wanted to be when he grew up.
Even when I was doing, my PhD in science, come 12 o'clock at night, I'd spend from 12 till 4 in the morning doing my artwork. But come 10 o'clock, to be back into the science role again. So the two things seemed very distinct. I seemed almost to have two completely separate ways of life. And that seemed completely hopeless at the time. And later on, when I gave up science and went to art school, again, I'd be doing science in the background, writing papers or giving lectures. But again, there was no obvious bridge between the two. And that really works on your mind, when you're doing the science, you think, why did I have to give up the art? And when you're doing the art, you think, why did I have to give up the science? And, why should I have given up the science?
So there's the scan.
Yeah.
Now, Richard has finally combined his two passions.
The blue-black?
He's studying the art of Jackson Pollock by employing the science he continues to pursue in nanotechnology.
What I'm doing is using my artistic background and my science background and putting those two together to look at what Pollock was actually doing. And what we seem to be showing is that he was capturing the trademark of nature on his canvas.
For the past 10 years, Richard's been exploring the way electrons shoot through circuits that are so small, they're not much more than a collection of atoms. But his whole research changed direction when he saw that these minute electrical devices might observe one of the powerhouses of nature: chaos. A mysterious and dynamic process not yet fully understood, chaos is the mechanism which drives the weather, carves out the coastlines, determines the very world in which we live. Where the smallest variation at the beginning of a process can cause exponentially different outcomes. Where the combination of all the elements is so immense as to be incalculable. Chaos's trademark: extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. being able to generate chaos in the laboratory, to be able to observe this phenomenon, is one more step to understanding its mysteries. To put chaos theory into practice, Richard designed and built a specific nano device. Smaller than the wavelength of light, only an electron microscope can reveal its infinitesimal simplicity. Like a pool table, the four walls contain the electron's path as voltage pushes them through. At a flick of a switch, a circular wall can be introduced. It's the key to chaos. Suddenly, the electron's path becomes extremely sensitive to their initial conditions.
So if we have a look at the electron and how it flows through the device, there are two distinct types of behaviour. The first is called regular non-chaotic behaviour, where it's very, very predictable. So if I launch this electron, then it travels in a very, very predictable way. And if I launch it again, just changing the launch conditions just a little bit, so hitting the ball in a slightly different direction, it travels in roughly the same direction, and so it's very, very predictable. Now if we flick on a switch in our device and introduce the circle, then we get the second type of behaviour, which is called chaotic, where it becomes far, far more difficult to actually predict where the electron's going to go. So if I launch the electron, then it goes flying off to that side of the table. Now if I just change the launch conditions just a little bit and try the same thing again, then the electron goes in a completely different direction. So with chaotic behaviour, it's very, very difficult to predict where the electron's going to go.
Entombed in a dilution fridge, the device is subjected to incredibly low temperatures to reduce the vibrations of atoms in its minute construction.
Okay, Adam, if you can clear the area.
The only way Richard is able to observe if the electrons become chaotic is by monitoring the resistance they encounter. But it's only after the circle is switched on that Richard will know if his device works at all.
The journey to an experiment is a very, very long one of making this incredibly small device, and you've got to go through a number of stages, and you've got to get each one exactly right. So by the time you approach the experiment, you know, you've got months and months behind you, and you know that it's either going to be good or bad, and there you are staring at the screen just waiting. Okay, well there we go. At least we've got a device.
The device not only worked, but later analysis confirmed the pattern of resistance had the unmistakable fingerprint left by chaotic events. At the flick of a switch, chaos had literally turned on. How this extraordinary function of nanotechnology might be applied will be left to others. But like all pure research, the success is in understanding the process and making it work.
I feel quite proud that I've actually made one of these things. And then when you get to the data stage, I also like that idea of being able to take the data and build a story from it. So that scientific input is very, very similar to the way that I'm actually painting a painting as well. You know, you're actually building something and then you're actually creating a story from it. Okay, so kids, don't try this one at home.
Richard has become increasingly fascinated by chaos and the pattern left by chaotic events. Here, in Australia's capital, Dr. Richard Taylor is looking for more evidence of chaos. But he's not visiting the CSIRO, nor the Australian National University, not even the Science Museum. His destination? The Australian National Gallery. chaos, joining science and art. Amongst the collection is Australia's most controversial painting, Blue Poles, by Jackson Pollock.
When you walk up to it and you look at it, it's just like so much is going on in there. It's like a battleground. It's obviously abstract, so that brings a bit of ambiguity. Nobody knows what's lying in there, so there's obviously been a huge amount of speculation. For 50 years now, people have been asking, what exactly was he capturing in those paintings?
Richard hopes to further our understanding of blue poles and Pollock's technique by combining his knowledge of both science and art to add yet another chapter to the painting's already colourful history.
It was actually painted in 1952, towards the end of his career when he started to descend into his drunken ways again. And it was painted on a very stormy night when he was actually in a drunken suicidal state. And he phoned up a friend who came over to try and calm him down. And the way that he calmed him down was to try and make Jackson Pollock paint. So he rolled a canvas out on the floor, and this guy actually got a tube of paint and squirted it all over the canvas. And Jackson Pollock jumped in and said, so that's the way you paint, this is the way I paint. And he grabbed hold of the can, just as he normally does, a black can of paint, and dipped in a wooden stick and walked around the canvas, dripping this nice little trajectory down there, and stepped back. And this guy thought, oh no, he's finished. So then he jumped in again and got Jackson Pollock completely involved in the painting. And then Jackson Pollock used to sometimes use little syringes to actually inject the paint onto the ground. But these kept on clogging up, so he'd throw them onto the canvas and they'd break. And then the two of them would continue walking into the canvas, which was very rare to actually walk on the canvas, and cutting themselves. So lying in that paintwork, there's glass, there's blood, there's several layers of paint going in there. Then about an hour or two into that evening, Jackson Pollock passed out in a drunken, unconscious state. So if you leave the story there, it's obviously very controversial because the Australian government paid $2 million for this painting, which was apparently painted just in one night while he was drunk, and he didn't even start the painting. But there's obviously another chapter to that story which people don't often know, and that is that in his usual way, he then spent up to 6 months actually going back to that painting and painting layer over layer of these various paints. And that's what gave me the first clue that actually he might be chaotic himself, because that's very, very similar to the way that nature operates, that you have a cumulative, repetitive process, just like waves crashing, up against the shoreline. That's what builds the rock face pattern. And just like leaves falling down from a tree, they fall down day after day after day, and that's what builds up that nice pattern of leaves on the ground. And so that's exactly what Jackson Pollock was doing as well. And you just have to look at that painting to see the enormous amount of paint that's actually got onto that canvas. That's 6 months of work. So, if you were to ask me, is that worth $2 million? I'd say absolutely, definitely, because he's actually captured nature in a very unique way, which nobody previously in modern art has managed to do.
Yeah, the fragmentations had its effect.
Yeah.
Already, Richard has taken what he knows about chaos theory and fractals and applied it to some of Pollock's earlier works.
That's always really easy to pull out. The unique aspect of Pollock was the way that he actually picked up a can of paint and dripped it onto the canvas, and that created a trajectory. When it comes to trajectories, as scientists, we know what we're talking about. And so those trajectories of Pollock's, are screaming out, come on, science, come and get me. And that's what we've done. We've gone after those trajectories and we've identified exactly what their quality was.
Called fractals, they're found throughout nature, characterised by a pattern repeating itself at different magnifications. Fractals are what's left behind by chaos. These computer-generated fractals were created by Benoit Mandelbrot, one of the fathers of chaos theory. They elegantly illustrate the concept of fractals. The patterns recur on finer and finer scales. But unlike these artificial fractals, nature's fractals are different.
Fractals generated by a computer have what's called exact self-similarity, which means that you take a pattern and as you zoom in, the same pattern repeats exactly each time. Nature works on something called statistical self-similarity, where the statistics of the pattern repeat themselves on different levels. The branches of a tree is a right example of statistical self-similarity. You have the branches, and then you have smaller branches going off to the twigs. Now, although, you know, the twigs don't look exactly the same as the branches, they've got that same degree of irregularity. They've got that sort of same quality to them on each level.
The pattern of resistance in the nano experiment also demonstrated statistical self-similarity. It was fractal. Chaos had left its mark.
So let's first just check that we've got everything.
Richard and his team have developed a technique for examining the pattern wrought by Pollock in his earlier works.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much got everything.
The computer calculates the degree to which irregularities of the pattern repeat themselves at smaller scales. The results determine if the pattern is fractal.
As well. So they're definitely fractal, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, great. Science is quite a powerful instrument. You know, you can use it in a way which can completely shatter a subject. So we're treading quite lightly, but I think I'm using my scientific objectivity and my artistic subjectivity to create that special sort of mix. So that we're actually looking at Pollock's paintings without completely eroding the romanticism and mysticism associated with his image.
Blue Poles was the last of Pollock's successful drip paintings. Richard believes that it will be fractal, like the earlier paintings he's examined. Very fractal, as Pollock got better at reproducing patterns in nature. The result of chaotic behaviour, not random, but chaotic in the true scientific sense. A process deliberately selected by the painter.
Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. This way I can walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting.
Looking at the way that he dances around the canvas, you know, as a scientist, you can look at that motion and say that has a large possibility of being chaotic, and therefore that the patterns themselves have a large possibility of being fractal. Okay, lads, I'm back from my free trip to Canberra. Richard. And I've bought you an incredibly expensive present.
Back in Sydney, in the same lab where tiny electrical devices, fractals and chaos mix, Richard Taylor will once again use the computer to examine the structure of a Pollock painting. The history and emotion of Blue Poles can be momentarily put aside to reveal the purity of the painting's patterns. Science and art together. The skill of observation.
So there's the scan.
Yeah, so let's look at the black first.
Each layer of paint is separated out into its own pattern.
Grab that, and then...
These patterns are analysed for their fractal content. The results combine to give a picture of the degree to which Blue Poles is fractal.
My theory is that from the very moment that humanity crawled out of the seas, he was surrounded by these natural patterns which contain these fractals in them. So he has it encoded in his mind, you know, to anybody. What do I want to see? What do I find comforting? You know, what reminds me of home? It's the fractal. So as we go through the 20th century and we surround ourselves by these cities, which are not fractal, then we get this sort of natural thirst for fractals. We want to go looking for them. So when we start to look at artwork, you know, what do we want to see? We're actually craving for fractals, and that's what Jackson Pollock has in his paintings.
This is just a photograph of some cracks in the mud, so that's a very natural pattern and has a very high fractal content. Then with the right-hand one, what we've done is electronically distorted it to actually remove the fractal content. So if people get drawn towards fractals, they'll really like the one on the left because it reminds them of nature. Which one of these two do you find most visually appealing?
The one on the left.
I like this one.
Do you like the one on the right?
Yeah.
I like the swirly one.
The one on the right?
That one's more stimulating. I guess that one's pretty bland, actually.
Very bland.
Yeah. I'll find the one on the left, yeah.
Is there anything that you like about the one on the left?
No, not really. Doesn't do anything for me.
All right,
No.
great.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Is that it?
Nail in the coffin.
Probably the one on the left.
Left hand side. Why is that? Why do you find that really?
I just enjoy the more natural.
That's exactly what we want to use to say.
The one on the left. Yeah, probably the left one.
The one on the left. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Just the natural one, for sure.
The one on the left.
Yeah.
The one on the left-hand
The one
side.
on the left.
The left one.
The one on the left.
Your eye does get drawn into the one on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers.
So if people get drawn towards the fractals in a natural pattern, that's why they're getting drawn towards Jackson Pollock's pictures as well, because they contain fractals and they remind them of nature.
I think like it looks sort of like a lightning storm.
Perhaps a micro world or grass or something like that.
Corals and things.
And like down the bottom looks sort of like waves and that, with a lot of movement.
I'm starting to like it and like it more every time I see it.
And like the lightning could be like with lots of rain and stuff.
I like the colours, I like the rhythm of it.
Like it sort of looks like mountains in the background and...
I like the way it moves my eye and my consciousness and doesn't let it rest.
I don't know, volcanoes or snowstorm, just something with a lot of like movement and action in it.
All right, let's see if blue poles is fractal.
Okay, about 1.7, 1.78.
Yes,
They're pretty close.
very, very fractal. Yeah. Blue poles is very highly fractal, yeah. And that's what we expect, because that was painted towards the end of his career in 1952. And we've charted that progress, and he seems to be getting more and more fractal towards his peak. And it seems to be that blue poles was right at his peak. Pollock definitely knew what he was doing, and there are several clues as to how we know that. The first is that he actually got better and better at introducing fractals into the painting. So that's definitely a clue, you know, that he knew what he was trying to strive for. The second is that within a painting, he'd sometimes get halfway through the painting and just decide that it just wasn't working. It didn't have that quality that he was looking for. And the third one, the thing that people don't often realise, is that after he'd finished painting, he'd actually strip the edges of the canvas away, that there were parts of the canvas where it didn't have that quality and there were parts that did. So again, when it came to his finished painting, he actually hung up the bit which had the largest amount of fractality to it. So he wouldn't have known the word fractal, but he still knew the trademark and the very essence of what makes up a natural pattern, and that was what he was able to commit to canvas.
None of Jackson Pollock's paintings, you know, happened easily. You know, each one was like a battlefield. And I'm going through exactly the same thing right now. Should I put that extra black on? Is it going to completely dominate the picture, or should I just leave it like it is? It's not an easy decision. I've decided to go for a few red and blue splatters, but nothing to dominate the picture, just something to offset the white a little bit. And I'm going to start with the red, see what happens, and then move on to the blue. The old pet trick one last time. A little cautious this time.
But Richard Taylor's work doesn't stop with art or physics.
Yeah, that's the planum temporal, and that's the primary hearing area.
Here, collaborating with neurobiologist Dr. Jenny Harristy, Richard has even found fractal patterns in the cell structure of the human brain.
Okay, so what we have here is a graph. Well, now with chaos theory, you know, you really can talk to a biologist, you can talk to a chemist, you know, talk to an artist. And I think that really has just been a breath of fresh air for science. You know, it stopped this specialisation and kind of just mixed everything up again, you know, so people can start talking. And that's great. You know, that's what science needed.
Chaos has taken Richard past the previous limits of knowledge about nanotechnology and given us all a greater understanding of an important 20th century artist. But for Richard, using this force of nature to combine his two loves has been the most rewarding application of chaos.
Okay, that's it. I'm going to call it blue splatter. At times it's been a very rough road. I've given up science to go for art, and then I've given up art to go for science. And when you leave one behind, you're always thinking, well, you know, the grass is always greener, you know. So when you get to the point where finally, after years of people telling you, you know, you've got to go one route or the other, and then you suddenly find a field where you can, you know, do both at the same time, and one helps the other, you know, that's just absolutely amazing. Yeah.